Hi there, this is Dr. Everybody. Now we're at project 4. This is a project where we're going to be using functions. And so we're going to give you a skeleton file that has a bunch of functions in it. And this has a slightly different structure. It has a main. And now that we have functions, we can do it that way, and that allows us to do some testing. But it is a game. It's a game of craps. And this will have some structures similar to the game of NIM in that there is a while loop for playing each game. You're like, do you want to play another game? Yes, I do. And then when you play the game, because we don't know how many times you're going to roll the dice before you win the game of craps, we have another while loop in there. And then because there's some rules, we have some if statements in here. Actually, the complexity of this one is not as complex as the game of NIM. But we do have a lot of functions in here, and that's ends up being a big part of this project. So let's take a look at it. First of all, let's start with how you play the game. This is a wagering game, and this is a much simplified game. The rules of wagering in craps is immensely complex. Maybe not immensely, but it's much more complex than what we're dealing with here. Here, you're just betting on winning and losing. So let's take a look at the rules of this, right? So you have two dice. Each one has 6 faces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you roll them. And so that means you roll the dice. You roll a die, and then you roll another die, and then you look at the sum that you have. Right now, in the real world, you actually have 2 dice that you roll. In our computer world, you actually roll, you get its value, you roll again, and now you have a second value, and you find the sum of those. All right, so now you have a number, you have an integer. As you can see, this can go up to 12. Then it starts to get interesting. So, look at that, if the sum is a 7 or 11, on the first throw, the player wins, and this is called a natural. Right. And so notice that we had to look at values here, and we do something different on the first throw than we do on other throws. Got to watch out for that. Right. Now, if we're still on the first throw, right, if you get a 2, a 3, or a 12, on the first throw, there's the first throw. Then that's called craps, and the player loses. That is, the house wins. The player doesn't win. That's what happens on first throws. All right. And if the sum is any other number, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, on the first throw, then that becomes what's known as the point, the player's point. Okay. And then the way the game proceeds, so if it wasn't a natural, if it wasn't craps, now whatever value, suppose it was a 6, we keep rolling the dice until you get a 6. If you get 6, or whatever the point value is, then you make your point, you win. However, if you happen to get a 7 before you make the point, then you lose. Kind of complex. Let's take a look at how we will actually play this game. And as before, you want to think about coming up with a strategy. And this is a good part of this to do with somebody else. Sit down with somebody else, work out this part. Then, as before, when you're writing the code, you need to be doing that on your own. So what does our strategy look like? Well, we're going to have this, like before, something like while we're not done. You know, this is play another game. Right, so we had that before in the game of Nim, and then we're going to actually have our game. And you might be tempted to do this while the game is not over. And you know, so here we're actually playing the game. We keep playing, and then when we get done with the game, then we ask, do you want to play another game? Turns out, I suggest, much as I don't like while trues, that you actually do this game as a while true. That will be a loop. If you have this, then someplace you need a break. Someplace in there. And that will be if we have a win or a loss, then we're going to have a break. So we're going to expect to see that code in there someplace. Now, let's, you know, so we expect to see that in there someplace, and let's sort of ignore that for the moment. How does this work? Well, this, if we look back at the code, at the rules, it says you have to roll the dice. So we're going to have one value from rolling the dice. All right, and guess what? Then we've got to roll again to get the other value. Now I got two values, and I have to sum those. So we've looked at this. We've let me slide this over a little bit. So we rolled the dice twice. We found the sum. Now we have to look at the sum and whether it's the first throw. So we need to handle that separately. So if it's the first throw, notice that, it's Boolean, then we do some stuff. Is this a 7 or 11? If it is, you know, we won, and we need to break out of our loop. All right, and there'll be other stuff that you have to think about here. Otherwise, guess what? It's not the first throw. And you got to do some stuff in here. And so somewhere in here we have, we have this decisions about whether we're winning or losing and whether we have a break. So I'm going to take my note out of here because I actually have a break in there now. And so we have to watch out for my indentation here. But after I'm done with the game, I need to figure out, is the win natural? You know, is the loss craps? And so on. So I have to, you know, that decision is done after we play the game. You know, what kind of loss is it? Okay, so then, you know, if we go back here, we've got the point stuff. So when did the point stuff happen? Well, that was when we had the first throw, and so maybe in here I better be figuring out, you know, do I have point? And then how do I handle that? And then in here I need to do something about, did I make point? And if so, then I've won. And so you've got decisions to be in there, but notice that I have a structure now. So I've got an outer loop here, and then you know, and that's, do I want to play a game or not? And then here I have this loop. This is my game. Right? And in there, you know, I do things like I roll the dice and find the sum, and then if it's first throw, I look at my sum, right, because that's where the 7 or 11 comes from, and so on. And after I play a game, then I have to decide, did I, you know, is my win a natural or craps or you know, the point, or you know, these types of things I have to decide as part of that. And then I have to ask the question, play another game, right? And that's the do we want to play another game? So it turns out that all of this stuff is in my main function. And so and this will have to all be indented. It's a little hard for me to do in this particular editor. But that's the main part of the game. Right. So if we look at the code, the skeleton code that we give you, so there are some different parts to it. So we do roll the dice randomly, except that for testing we actually cheat and we give you our own random function that isn't random. That allows us to test it. So you know, like maybe a 2 will come up first and so on. So for testing, we'll actually have the same roll there. So we have a function that displays the game, and we gave that to you. And there's a bunch of other functions, and I'll tell you that many of these functions are just 1 line long. Okay? And a few of them have half a dozen lines. So don't be surprised if you look at these and go, boy, this function doesn't do much. And that's fine. So we have all these different functions that you have to do, and here's the def main, right? That's this stuff. That's going to go, that's where that goes. It goes in there. And then this part, you know, make sure you leave that in there. This is important. What this does is this allows us to test the functions individually. That's really nice. So you know, that helps you out. Oh, you can write individual functions and test them out and make sure they're working. And some of these things should already look familiar to you. So here's one to roll the die. Guess what? I'm going to be calling that function in rolling the die, and what goes in there? That's going to be calling a random my random number generator, so that we're rolling the dice. We don't know what's going to come up with there. There are some functions on wagering, so we have to keep a bank balance, and it, you know things like this function here. You know, you're making a wager. Suppose you have $20 in your bank. Well, you're not going to be allowed to make a $30 bet. So we have a function that checks that. Find the sum of the dice. Hey, that'll be a 1-line function. Think about that. You can do that just 1 line. And then notice these two. That we have a different type of result. You know, the way we handle things on the first roll than we do on subsequent rolls. We can go back to my code. Look at that. In the first throw, I'm dealing with what's happening with that function. Otherwise, when it's not the first throw, then I'm dealing with that function. So there's kind of an overview of the functions from a coding standpoint. And by the way, each of these has this thing called pass. That's just a filler. So that what that means is that this code, even though it doesn't do anything, will actually run without an error. And as part of that, as part of that function, we do have this randint, and that takes 2 values. So and we will always call it with a 1 and a 6. Notice how we get a little help down here of how this works. And that just gives me a random number. And we can just keep calling it, and I keep getting, it just gives me an integer between 1 and 6 inclusive. And that's what when you roll the die, what happens? You get a number between 1 and 6. And so this function does that. And what you need to do, and you can sort of see it up here, is that in the same folder or directory that I have my program in, I have to have this random in there so it can be found in terms of so you can test stuff out the same way we do on Mirror. And if you're curious, take a look at that function. It's a generator. It's got a list in it. It's got some more advanced stuff. If you're curious about that, take a look. But what it's doing is it's just pretending to be a random function. So there's stuff about the game, and then each one of these functions has a description of what it's supposed to do. So like for example, what do we do on the first roll of dice? Well, if the sum is 11, then the player wins, so we return the string win. So this function returns a string. And if it's that, then notice that we've sort of set you up here by all these if statements in here, right? And so that gives you a clue as to how you're going to write those. I suggest that you fill in this design with somebody else. And talk about the design of what are you going to do inside of these functions, and then go up and code them yourself. Before you write this code, before you take that code and actually put it in as Python in here, I strongly suggest that you write each function and test it out. And you can, in fact, test functions out. Get the bank balance, and of course doesn't do anything here, but hopefully it will as part of your code. All right. Oops. I want to take some here. Okay, so with that, hopefully there's enough for you to get started on this. Good luck.